So excited that everybody's here joining us. I'm going to give a quick introduction to our guest, our esteemed speaker, Dr. Dale Atkins. And for me, it's really a personal privilege. Before I got to know everybody here on this screen, sitting here in Los Angeles, I was just a young rabbinic intern in Greenwich, Connecticut, figuring out what to do and what not to do as a rabbi. And Dale and her husband were Shabbat regulars at Temple Shalom in Greenwich, Connecticut. Just a shout out to my Temple Shalom family, who I'm still connected with to this day. And there are some people that you just know that you have to continue communicating with throughout your life, both personally and professionally. And Dale was one of those. Over the last 10 years, we've been in touch, and we reconnected out here in Los Angeles just a couple of months ago, as Dale was taking her book, The Kindness Advantage, which if you do not have it, you need to get a copy. It's a my Bible in my house right now during these times, The Kindness Advantage. And we were actually going to do a live program. I believe it was April 23rd. And when we realized that that could not happen, we started talking with Farshad as well. And we realized that in this time specifically, there was no better time to present the kindness advantage than now. And we know the title is about resilience, how you continue to have the kindness advantage now and whenever we're done with this. So a brief bio of Dr. Dale Atkins, and just the rules of the game. Again, if you have a question for Dale, if you can put it in the chat box, that would be great. Dale's going to present for about 15 minutes or so. I'll ask a few questions, and then we'll be a little more interactive as well. We are live on YouTube as well, and it'll be archived. So if you wish not to have your picture shown, not a problem. Just want to let you know that as well. So without further ado, Dale Atkins, PhD, licensed psychologist, for almost 3 decades of experience as a relationship expert, focusing on families, couples, parenting, aging well, managing stress, and maintaining balance in one's life. She does all of those all at once, so it's pretty amazing. She consults domestically and internationally, and you may have seen Dale not just on Zoom, but for many years as a frequent guest on NBC TV's Today Show and CNN's Headline News. Additionally, she's on the boards of several nonprofit, local, and national organizations focusing on literacy, tolerance, wellness, child protection, and community, with a private practice in the New York area. So it's my true honor and privilege to present my friend and also my mentor and teacher, Dr. Dale Atkins. Thank you, Dale.
Thank you, Erez, and thank you all. I really feel as if I'm with you, and that speaks to the warmth and the welcome that I've had since we thought about doing this. And Farshad, thank you for making it happen with your men's group. And Ebby, I have spoken about the kindness advantage many times. I'm deeply touched by the research and how you wove it into the Dvar Torah tonight. So thank you so very much for that. And I actually should just hand over the reins to you, because you mentioned almost everything that I would like to touch. So we're going to have it be just reinforcing.
Thank you very much.
Pardon me?
Thank you for your kind words.
Yes, yes. So I guess we'll just jump off with why a book about kindness, right? My niece, Amanda Salzauer, who is a social worker, and I were seeing many upticks of bullying behavior and unkind and disrespectful behavior, not only within the child's world that we were seeing in our practices and also the kids we knew, but also in the world. And we were seeing models, role models of unkind behavior. And we said, this is not okay, because kindness is actually something that we're born with, the propensity to be kind. We're hardwired to have a moral compass. And without nurturing kindness, without nurturing and practicing it, it really will atrophy like a muscle. The same, by the way, is true of resilience. Resilience is a learned skill. Some of us are more resilient than others by nature, but we all have the elements of resilience. And just so we're clear, resilience is generally referred to as a person's ability to get through some very difficult time with kind of with rapidity. So how fast do they get through a really difficult time? You'll notice that I didn't use the words bounce back, because when people talk about resilience, a lot of people say, how quickly is this person going to bounce back? And I'd just like you to hold that over here for a minute, because I'm not that interested in our bouncing back through this COVID period. I'm much more interested, and hopefully our discussion will invite us to examine how we're going to go through it and what we're going to do as a result of it, and how we move through this time and hopefully gain many, many aspects, characteristics, qualities that we might not have really had before, or we didn't know we had, and integrate them as we go forward. So kindness is one of the things that we want to bring into our homes, into our community, into our virtual communities, because we all need it so much. One of the things that most of us need is human touch. And it's one of the things that so many people during this period are deprived of. So not only if you're living with other people, but also just when you are able to connect with them, how can you touch them? How can you make them feel as if you're connected and that you really care about them? So how can we infuse our lives with kindness? So when Amanda and I were thinking about this was well before COVID, this was a few years ago, we said, wait a minute, I think what we really need to do is write a book that will be helpful to parents and grandparents. And it turned out that it's been used by teachers and parents and grandparents and people in the business world and all walks of life. And I think one of the reasons is because kindness leads to compassion, and kindness leads to happiness. There are some wonderful research studies, and I'll cite a couple, of the links between happiness and kindness. And it also has been linked to future success. Kindness has been linked to better and more quality relationships, improved self-esteem, particularly in young children, confidence, good mental and physical health, a sense of purpose and meaning in one's life. And even kindness has been linked to slowing the aging process and reducing anxiety. So as we think of where we are now, we are social beings and we need to be connected. So the question is, how can we maximize the connections that we have with the people that we're living with physically? And if we're living alone, how can we maximize the connections we have with people who we're hopefully in touch with? So when we were writing the book, we interviewed quite a lot of people about how come they were so charitable, because the original book was going to be about raising charitable children. And then what we found was that so many charitable people had qualities in common. And what we did was we kind of isolated these qualities, even though they were related to one another. And they all seemed to be the components, not all, but many of the components of kindness. And I'll just kind of share the list with you. And I'd like you to think about it in the context of not only kindness, but also resilience. How quickly are we able to right ourselves after we go through something that's very challenging? Okay, so the first one would be acceptance. And the second is commitment, followed by connection, empathy, giving, interest, nurturing, observing, questioning, and then being yourself. So we'll talk about some of them individually. In the book, we have a chapter on each, and we have examples of young kids who are doing phenomenal things and ways for parents to talk with their children about each of these qualities and about kindness and why it's a good idea to be kind and how can you be kind. So when we think about kindness, we think about paying attention, and we think about showing patience and communicating respectfully and showing compassion for others. We also have a responsibility as Jews in particular to model kindness so that our children and others are watching us. And what are they seeing? We are their role models, and we don't expect us to be perfect role models all the time, perfect parents, perfect citizens. But what we do expect is that we'll try to look at the world through a lens of kindness, that we'll notice kind acts, that will observe people who are doing things that are kind, that will point them out to our significant others and to our children, and that will talk about them. What do you think is really motivating that person? Would you do something similar? If your mother was with you when that happened, how would you have behaved? If you were just with a group of friends, how would you have behaved? And we can have these conversations just off the cuff, watching something on TV, reading about characters in books. And just for a moment, reading about characters in books, there's something called the Goldilocks effect. You may have heard about it. And really what happens is we notice that children who are read to when they are very young tend to be more engaged with others because they feel that they can make a difference in the world. Because when they're read to, they're usually engaged about characters and the character's motivation and what the situation is about the story. And they can feel that they can make a difference. It's quite remarkable. So the more you read to your children and the more you engage them with reading, as they get older, you may not be reading a book to them, but maybe you can read a book that they're reading and talk about the dilemmas that the characters have and put it in the context of today's world. I think that most people understand the connection between reading to children and their academic success, but far too few of us recognize the significance of reading to children and engaging them through reading and probably their future of being charitable and giving children and young adults. So I think that's really an important connection. The other connection is that most parents say that they want their kids to be kind. More than anything, they want them to be kind. But when you ask children what their parents want for them more than anything, the message they seem to be getting, the primary message, is that they want them to do well in their academics and they want them to be very successful in the world. And kindness doesn't often even come close to what kids interpret their parents' value. Or it's like a throwaway. Well, of course they want me to be kind, but what does that look like? And are kids being reinforced and attended to for their acts and thoughts of kindness? And it's something that we can do now, particularly when we're spending a lot of time with our kids. So the kindness advantage is really when you're kind, it makes you feel good, it helps you feel connected, and it gives your life meaning. So I just want to switch roles for a minute and talk a little bit about asking you to think for just a moment about someone who was kind to you when you were a young person. And if you can kind of bring that person to mind for a moment and think about the qualities that they had and think about how it felt to you when you were a recipient of an act of kindness by this person and what that did for you as a kid growing up. Did it make you feel good about yourself? Did it make you feel that you were valued? Did it make you feel heard? Did it make you feel understood? Did it make you feel that you made a difference? There's lots and lots of ways we can feel when someone is kind to us. And one of the things that happens when we're kind to someone, we get a flood of endorphins. When we're kind to someone else, they also get this rush of endorphins. And if you watch someone do an act of kindness or read about someone heroic and someone who's inspiring, that person, the watcher, also has a flood of actually, when they're watching, they're getting a flood of oxytocin, which is kind of the love hormone. So all of us, whether we are doing an act of kindness, receiving an act of kindness, or watching an act of kindness, have our entire chemistry of our body change because our brain changes. And also it encourages us to do more acts of kindness. So one could argue, and research shows, that the more acts of kindness that you do, the more likely you're going to do more. The more you do more, the more endorphins are released, and the more you start looking at yourself and the world through a very different lens, and it does change us. And that's why what I initially started off with all those changes about what happens, why be kind, that actually happens to us. So here we are in a situation where we're in quarantine and we're living with people that we love, hopefully. We may not be getting along 100% of the time because each of us is going through our own reaction to how we're perceiving this quarantine. And so we really have to think about, what do we need to be resilient? And one of the things we need to be resilient is kindness. We need to be kind to ourselves. We need to be kind to ourselves, not only to be kind to ourselves, to give ourselves a break. All of you who are teaching your children at home, you're not homeschooling, please. You are helping your children get through a crisis in the world. You are supporting them through something. You don't all have to become teachers, and you don't all have to know how to do all the algebra that you haven't even done since you were in high school, or maybe you never did it anyway. That's not your role now. Your role is to be kind to yourself and be kind to your kids, because they're going through a tough time. They're not with their friends. They're wondering what's going to happen. Try and keep your home as calm as possible, which is one element of resilience, to be kind to yourself, and then you can be kind to others. It's a lot easier to be kind to others when you're taking care of your own needs. And it's hard. If you have a schedule and a routine, it's a lot easier. Adaptability. How do we adapt to this whole new world about which we know very little? And every time we turn the news on, we hear something new or different, or that challenged what we heard yesterday. So try to limit your news intake, and please try not to watch just before you go to bed. One of the things that is helpful at this time for adaptability is to really try and have some kind of a sleep routine that encourages you to get a peaceful night's sleep, and to keep the news at a minimum, what you need. And if you're watching the news, be sure you're interpreting it if your children are seeing it, and filtering it for your children, because children are seeing things in a way that is different from the way adults see it. And we really need to monitor. And a lot of kids are getting their news about what's going on in the world through the internet. And some of it may or may not be the kind of news that you want them to see. So again, our role is to encourage the kids and to give them an emotional stability and a feeling of safety while this is happening. So there's a lot of uncertainty. How do you adapt? How do you live with uncertainty? It's one of the challenges that we have. Another challenge is being connected. And it's so fabulous that you are all so connected through the screens. And one of the ways, I'll just give one way that I know helps people feel connected, is that when you check in with someone, or you call them, or you're looking at them on FaceTime, talk about what's going on, of course, but then try to go into your memory and remember a wonderful engagement that you might have had with that person. And it may have been decades ago. And recall it, and tell them what you learned from it, or why you're laughing when you think about it, and revisit something that was really fun or poignant and meaningful in some way. When we connect with people, the idea is to make them know their value, just like the questions I asked when you were recalling who was kind to you when you were younger. So now, in real time, let someone know when you're talking to them, maybe what they taught you, or why you're interested in something because they were interested in something. And also, when you connect, offer something of yourself. I recently received a magnificent gift. I had written something, and it was in a newsletter that I published, and I referenced the song Smile. You know, smile when your heart is breaking, that song. And a nephew of ours, who's a trumpet player, unbeknownst to me, recorded it in his basement, played it and the trumpet, and sent it to me. And I was going to sleep one night, and I noticed that he sent an email, and I listened to it. I opened it and I listened to it. I must tell you that, I mean, I'm sharing it with you now. It was so meaningful to me. It was so touching, and it was an incredible act of kindness. So when we think of reaching to people who we are not able to literally touch, how can we touch them? We are not, I have a real thing about this social distancing. And there's also this wonderful researcher whom I admire greatly. His name is Richie Davidson, and I heard him talk about this recently. I've been saying that since this started, we are not social distancing. Quite the contrary. We are working so hard to stay socially connected with one another. With great odds, we are physical distancing. And physically distancing is an act of kindness, because as hard as it is for us, the reason we're staying apart from each other is so that we don't infect each other, because it's contagious. Well, kindness is also contagious, and we can keep trying to share kindness with the people that we're connected to. Another aspect of resilience and resiliency has to do with control. And I think so many people are feeling as if they have no control over what's going on. And it's true. We don't have control over so many things that we thought we had control over. So it's not only living with uncertainty, but it's also living with a sense that we don't have control over some things. But that doesn't mean we don't have control over a lot of things. And so when we focus on what we do have control over, and we really pay attention, and we're mindfully connected with the people and the things that we're doing, we then can see, I really do have control over a lot of things right now. And one of the things we have control over, which is another element of resiliency, is learning. What are you learning? What are we all learning? Not only about viruses and all of this, but what are we learning about ourselves? What are we learning about the way we think and the way we approach problems and the way we connect with our family? And what are we learning about the kind of traditions that we want to be sure we are passing down and the behaviors that we're modeling? And what are we learning about painting? Maybe I never knew how to paint and I want to paint now. Or cooking. So that what are we doing to expand what we want to learn where we never had the time to? But more importantly, I would argue, is what are we doing to learn about ourselves so that when we get through this, what are we wanting more of? What are we wanting less of? And what are we learning? What are we learning from other people who have gone through really difficult times and have remained hopeful, or who've come out the other side and said, that doesn't serve me anymore. I used to think that worked for me, but that doesn't work. Now I need a new way of dealing with perhaps anxiety or fear. Many people are taking time to delve into prayer and learn more about Judaism or whatever their faith is. They're also learning about the power of the breath and relaxing and the value of relaxing as a way of not only taking care of themselves, but taking care of their entire family. Because whatever we do and however we express ourselves, however we communicate with other people, there are consequences. We have control over ourselves. We do not have control over everybody in our life. In fact, we have control over nobody in our life. But we do have control over how we process what we are experiencing. So I'd like to add one more thing that has to do with the adaptability and the kindness piece, and it has to do with meaning. Kindness, as I mentioned before, when we're kind, we also feel that we have meaning and purpose in our life. When we are resilient, we feel that whatever we're going through has changed us in some way. All of this is giving us an opportunity to transform, but it's an opportunity. We have to take the opportunity. We could go through this and not have learned anything, not have changed. Kind of what would be the point of that? Whenever we go through adversity, we hope that we can learn something and we can become more or better in a way of who we want to be. Will we be more engaged with people? Will the way we connect with them resonate with us in a way that we'd like to have continue? What choices are we going to make? And the other last piece has to do with engagement with others. How can we, even when we're in our own homes, connect with people, make a difference in the world, include our children, and include our extended family members in making significant change? The kindness advantage is really all about how we can infuse ourselves with taking care of ourselves so that we can do what we were put on this earth to do, in my opinion, which was be connected with others, help others. There was a wonderful book written by Julie Salomon, and it's called Rambam's Ladder. And in it, she talks about what Maimonides spoke about in what are the different levels, what are the rungs of the ladder as far as giving to others. Clearly, we are here to be of service. The question is, how can we do it? How important is it to us? And we have an opportunity to start with our own families. So I think I'm going to stop now for a moment and open this up to Erez to ask some questions. Thank you, Rebecca, for keeping me timed. And I really appreciate that. And then we'll have questions from the group.
Great. Thank you so much. I have more questions than I sent you last night, so I'm actually going to start with new ones based on what you just said. And then I already have several people have already chatted with me privately to ask questions. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat box, and we'll go from there. It seems like kindness is not a solitary trait. You don't just do kindness by itself, but as you talked about, kindness is with connectedness and kindness is with people. You actually, in the book, you quoted the author and illustrator James Owen about each of us being unique in the universe. And it's our uniqueness in what makes us valuable. And it reminds me of a teaching in the Mishnah that a person who creates coins puts them in a coin mold, and every coin's the same. But God, who mints human beings, puts them in a mold, and every single one of them is very unique. Can you maybe chat perhaps about how each of our uniqueness deals with kindness? I know this morning my wife and I tried this exercise in your book to talk about the different attributes that we are. We had to pick from that list, and it was fascinating to see how those attributes, lead to kindness. So if you can maybe just for a few seconds chat about kindness and uniqueness of the individual, and perhaps if it's true or not, how kindness, and you keep speaking about memory, and memory is so important within Judaism. Every Shabbat, Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim, we remember the Exodus of Egypt, everything we do. Actually, this afternoon, I asked my son, what's Lag BaOmer about? And he said, something that happened in the past. A very good Jewish answer. How does kindness go along with uniqueness of us and also memory of others?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because I would say that the be yourself fundamental is so important when we're thinking about parenting children and partnering with other people, because sometimes it's the uniqueness of that person that attracts us, but it also could be that which makes it really difficult for us. And we have unique children. Sometimes we have children who are nothing like us, and we say, oh my goodness, where did this kid come from? Where they have qualities, I don't know how to parent this child. And I think that what's important is that we let people understand, and as parents, it's really our job to help them understand that their uniqueness is what makes them so wonderful. And it's our job to figure out how we can help them engage and use their uniqueness and their interests and what makes them so special for good, for acts of kindness. And one of the things that I will just, say that I'll refer back to our nephew, who's the trumpet player. It's a great musician. It's a wonderful quality about him, and he uses that to give a gift. But with children, there's something about, you really are so great. Everybody loves to be with you. You love to make people laugh. A lot of people aren't feeling so great right now. So why don't you draw some funny cartoons that you do so well, and we'll turn them into cards and we'll send them to our friends, or you can send them to your friends, or just, so you use whatever it is their uniqueness is and make it shine a light on it. You talked about the exercise in the book. For those of you who haven't read the book, there's a couple of pages of a bunch of words, and we ask people to pick 3 words that describe them. And then we ask them to pick 3 words that other people would use to describe them. And sometimes they're the same and sometimes they're not. And it's really interesting to see what other people perceive of you that may be different from what you perceive. And so how you can then, with children, help them see that the qualities that other people see in them and the qualities they see in themselves can be used for good. As far as in Judaism, I think, when you read with children particularly, or you read with your significant others and people in your lives, and you read stories about great heroes who had personal qualities that really were, they were human beings, right? They had faults. We all have faults. And sometimes we only focus on those imperfections, and we're constantly trying to help our kids change and get better. And really what we need to do is help them feel encouraged for being just fine the way they are, And when they feel that acceptance, and when they feel that their uniqueness is okay, they'll probably have behaviors that will be a little easier for the family to deal with. And I see this so much in my practice, and I see this so much in schools, that be yourself and the uniqueness of each of us is something to be celebrated. And sometimes with kids, it's emphasized, but it's not celebrated. And it's often emphasized in a negative way. And I think that each of us is unique. And that's one of the most wonderful things about being a human being, that, we all don't look at the world the same way. And if it's important for you to have your children look at the world exactly the way you do, it's probably going to be problematic. But if we can have empathy and we can try and look through their eyes and see what they see and not impose what we need them to see, we can have a space for dialogue. We can have a space for growth. We can have a space for us to kind of be who we are in the same family and look at the world a bit differently.
It's actually when I meet with bar mitzvah students and bar mitzvah students, I first say, and it's with the parents, describe yourself. And they say funny, this, that. And then I say, how do your friends describe you? And sometimes it matches up and sometimes it doesn't. And then we ask the parents, how do you describe your child? And it's a really beautiful thing how the uniqueness matches up with that as well. I want to go to the macro level. This question from Farshad Rafi. We've been talking a lot about the interpersonal level. But can you apply these theories and ideas of kindness to the macro society level, i.e., and don't want to lose our 501c3 status tonight, but to political and national leaders? And is it important that they model kindness?
It is important that any leader model kindness. And the studies that are done at many business schools around the country, Adam Grant does a lot of work in this, is the value, the importance of having kind and strong and respectful leaders, and that one can be a very effective leader and have the qualities that have people who work with him or her feel valued, feel respected, feel heard, and that there's no room, there's no space, there's no point in insulting and degrading and diminishing behavior. And not only is it unkind, but it doesn't promote a good workspace and a good workplace. And when the studies are done with what really makes a good workplace and where do people stay a longer time, it often has to do with the culture of the workspace and the workplace, and that behaviors that are insulting and really challenging to a person's being, not their work, their being, is just not tolerated, and that people care about each other, and that people have a connection within the work group, and that they feel that they can be their authentic selves, that meetings are used for growth, not for annihilation. I don't think that one has to be, I don't think the discussion has to be political. I think the discussion has to be humane. And someone sent me a t-shirt the other day and it said, kindness is nonpartisan. It doesn't seem that way now, but in fact, kindness, we're born with it, so why not nurture it? And I think that when we think about the importance of role models, particularly for our children, and we see behavior that we don't approve of in our family, that this is not something that we condone, that we call it out. And you can differentiate a message from a messenger, but you also have to be able to help people understand, particularly children, that this is not okay, that whatever this is, that language is not okay, that bullying is not okay, that whatever it is, that not only isn't it okay, but this is why it's not okay. We do not have the right to destroy another person. We have the right to help other people. We don't have the right to diminish and degrade. And that when this kind of dialogue, when this kind of activity, when this kind of language is used, it needs to be called out. And children need to be able to understand why in our family we don't do it and we don't condone it, and that we have to counter that. Alternatively, when we see leaders who are respectful and are strong and are mindful in what they're saying and how they're saying it, we also want to point that out. And I think that what we can say to our kids is when we say things that we're embarrassed about, or that we say, oh, I wish I didn't say that, say, you know what? I thought about what I said, and I'm really sorry. If I could replay that, rewind it, this is how I would have preferred to have said that to you, and I'm really sorry. Or when we see someone else say something, we say, hey, what's another way to say that to get the point across? And engage the child so that they can use their creativity and say, oh, that's the only way to have a disagreement, to call someone names or to bully? No, there are lots of ways to disagree. There are lots of ways to be respectful of another person, to listen to their point of view. Most of us, when we have a point to make, we stop listening to what the person we're talking to is saying because we're very busy formulating our own argument. But I think when we can try and teach children how to listen, and then how to try and respectfully say, is this what you're saying? Because I really want to understand it. And then have that be clear, and then say, oh, well, this is how I feel about that. It's a process. It's a lifelong process. And certain people are much easier to communicate with than others, because certain people, just as soon as they open their mouth, our blood boils, and we have to be able to calm ourselves, recognize what's going on, be aware of what's going on. Don't push it under the rug, but say, okay, what do I need to do about that within me, my response? Maybe I don't respond right now because I'm too excited. But I'm going to get back to you because right now, and this, I wish more parents would do this. You know, what you did really is something I'm just so shocked. But I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about this in about 5 minutes because I want to organize myself and I want to say something that I think you're going to hear rather than something that I'll be sorry for. And I think that these kinds of experiences of communicating with people we care about in relation to the larger world is how we help nurture kindness. And when we see people, when we notice people, when we get out of our houses again, and you notice an act of kindness and you say to your child or your grandchild or your friend, did you see what that person did? That was so lovely. That really made me feel good. Because why? Because you just got this flood of endorphins.
So you mentioned that kindness is a lifelong journey. You actually quickly said we are born with it. That's a whole other question of Yetzer Hara and Yetzer HaTov. But I want to get to some of these questions based on that. Don, we're going to go back to your question in a few moments, but I want to get to the millennial generation, which I guess I am almost done with. So I'm still a part of. But so this question is not from me, perhaps it's about me. But millennials think that they are the center of the universe, and millennials perhaps feel entitled. How do those traits impact developing a strong sense of kindness? So maybe you can reflect on, you said we're born with it. How does that change, and how do we get it back, or how does it stay?
Well, there's a lot of studies being done now, actually in California, about the sense of entitlement. And what we're seeing is, believe it or not, a drop in empathy for college students, not all college students, but many college students. And so when we talk about empathy, we're really talking about being able to try and take another person's perspective, not only cognitively, but affectively, not just what they're thinking, but how they're feeling. And that we can really become the other, right? Try to understand what it is they're experiencing in our head and in our heart. And so we're seeing this kind of diminish, and it's there are some alarm bells going. You use the word entitlement, Erez, and I just want to say that my feeling is that we are all very special. Each person is special, but none of us needs to be entitled. We can be special without being entitled. And I think that what has happened is that, and it's not just this generation, but seems to be a lot in this generation. And I hope that what's happening now might shock people into thinking about this a little differently and understanding the importance of caring for the other and putting the other in front of themselves, which, by the way, there are studies of 3-month-old and 6-month-old and 9-month-old children who do that. We see it in their eye movements. We see that they would prefer a helper to a hinderer. We see that they would rather give a treat than take a treat. It's quite remarkable. So but it has to be nurtured. If it's not nurtured, and not only if it's not nurtured, if the tendency towards kindness is not valued, because you have to be in a group that values this. And if you are part of a group that doesn't value it, then you kind of want to be cool and you want to be one of the gang, and then it's not going to be done. So trying to help kids as they grow up be parts of small communities where the value of doing good for others and paying attention to how your words affect someone and your actions affect someone. And then those kids get older and older. And by the way, they see their parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles also behaving in this way, not just doing charitable acts and not just becoming involved and engaged in acts of kindness, but talking to their kids about what it has meant to them, how what they're doing changes them or affects them or is difficult for them, so that they can have a dialogue about what that's like. The kids that you're referring to often have not had those experiences. Also, studies show that when parents talk to their children about giving to others and being charitable, they talk a lot when kids are younger. And then in the preteen years, they talk about it. And then as kids get to be 14, 15, 16, maybe it's after bar mitzvah, I don't know, but the discussions drop off, and they mostly drop off when kids are 16, 17. And that's when kids are going to college. So if kids have had a really strong dose of this when they're younger, they'll probably be very, very socially and civically engaged as they get older. The other main component of this business of entitlement and lack of empathy has to do with, where's my phone? Show and tell, these things. And there's an entire generation of people who think it's absolutely perfectly fine to sit at a table with another human being and have a conversation with either that person on the phone or with other people. So understanding how intrusive technology has been on interpersonal communication. And the other piece is the social networking that a lot of young adults are engaged in. There seems to be a lax in civility rules for social engagement, for social media. And there's, you know this, you know the news, and there's a lot of studies to show that kids feel and seem to feel they have the right to be ganging up on one another. There's a lot of anonymity, and people will say things that they would never say to someone's face, but they say it. And then there's a whole group of people who kind of get behind what they're saying, and they can actually destroy someone's sense of themselves. And preteen girls are the most vulnerable for this, but preteen boys are also very vulnerable. There's an uptick in kids hurting themselves and taking their lives. And I think that when we have lost the ability to see the humanity in another person of any age, then we seem to think it's okay to treat them as if they are not there, or to treat them as if they are not human, or to treat them as if they are less than, certainly not to treat them with kindness.
So I'm going to combine a couple of different questions. I think what you mentioned at the end, B'Tselem Elohim, right? The idea that we are in the image of God, then how can you not treat somebody with that kindness? The idea that I just spoke about, the Yetzer Hara, Yetzer HaTov, several people have asked, basically, is kindness nature or nurture? But part B of that is, if it is, for instance, nature, then what do you do with people that are unkind by nature? And and somebody else in terms of genetics, as opposed to learning it. So how do we fit all that together? When do you say, you know what, I can't do anything in this situation, it's time for me to move on? I know, at least on the clergy end, we're thinking about the high holidays already. And these messages just ring true, not just during that time, but all year. So nature or nurture, and if it is nature, how do we deal with people that are unkind by nature?
I think that what we need to understand is that we're all human beings and we all have lots of influences in our lives. And some of us have very early role models of people who are not kind to us or kind to others. And I think we all try to adapt in the best way we can, and we try to cope in the best way we can. And that way may butt heads with others of us. Some of us are more gentle by nature. Some of us, we all have nature, right? We all have personalities, and there was a study in the 1970s by Stella Chess at NYU, and it was about temperamental match. So you could have a child who was like a slow to warm up child with a very effusive mom, and that wasn't a very good match. But if you had that same child with a different type of mom, it would be a perfect match. So I think that we have to understand temperaments and match. But your question is, yes, we have a tendency, but it has to be nurtured. So there are very, very few people who don't respond to a kindness, very few people. And I think what's challenging is, how hard do you work at trying to reach somebody who may not seem to be able to be connectable in the way that you want to connect? Certainly, we each have to make choices about the kinds of engagements that we have. Most of my writing is about families, and there are relationships that are obligatory, and then there are relationships that are by choice. And we're really lucky if we have obligatory relationships that we would choose, but some of us don't. And I think that we also have to pay attention to how we can only control how we act. And if somebody is really, lighting our fire and we're really getting upset, we have to step back. We have to be able to say, how do I want to behave? We are not going to behave in the way we want to behave all the time. But if we're aware of it, if in the back of our mind, we say, what would be the kind thing to do now? It might be to step back and say, this conversation is going to a place that I'm not able to go to right now. Let's try again in an hour, or I can't talk right now, or it's not going to be helpful, or what I say is not going to be good. To be able to check ourselves, because we can't check anybody else, and to just say, what is the kind thing to do now? What is the kind thing for me? And what would be the kind thing in this setting? And I think if we did that a little bit more, we might be able to then take that pause, take that step back, and say, okay, this person's really having a hard time. This person's really frightened. That's why they're screaming. That's why they're doing this. No, I don't want somebody to scream at me, but what now? What do I need to look at in this context? And if this person's screaming like a crazy person, I need to check out for a while. But I try not to, and I'm saying I, like all of us, we try not to demean the person in the process. Oh, you're nuts, you're crazy, you're this. It's not necessary. Certainly isn't going to help. It doesn't make us feel any better. But I think we have to take care of ourselves in these situations. And right now, during this pandemic time, so many people are on edge. There's no wiggle room. There's no bandwidth. There's whatever the expression is. We don't have anything to give. and yet we're having to give. So we need to, again, give to ourselves. Where are people in their prayer lives? Where are people in their ways of relaxing? Where are people in their moments, if they are lucky enough to live in a place where they can walk outside, and connecting with nature? Where are they in listening to their favorite music, in dancing, in laughing, whatever it is? How are we taking care of ourselves so that we have a little bit more wiggle room? Because a lot of people around us don't. How are we going to have more patience for our kids, right?
So you actually led to, let's say, the final question right now, and then we'll wrap up. I want to be respectful of people's time. Also, a big thank you to Dale, Dr. Dale Atkins. Actually, very familiar with California, doctor from down the street here at UCLA, and we hope that you'll be with us in person shortly. The last question, actually, you began to speak about. You just said, where are we in our prayer life? And somebody earlier asked, do you have thoughts about that aspect? Just for me, watching many of you here right now that have been tuning in, not just to programs, but also to services. Somebody said to me last week, somebody who's a regular on Shabbat, saying he actually thinks it's more strange for the regulars right now because we've been uprooted, if you wish. But on the opposite end, we see so many more, and I would say hundreds of people, at least in this community, that are connecting more to prayer. And there's a lot of things on YouTube besides Sinai Temple at the moment, but every Shabbat, without fail, hundreds and hundreds are streaming in, if you wish, and watching it after. So maybe we can just address personal prayer, group prayer, with the ideas of kindness in this moment that we're living in.
I think for so many people, one of the most important ways they're kind to themselves is to try and kind of go deep and reflect and see what is important to them. When this happens, people often become much more connected with their faith. They ask a lot of questions. And as Jews, we are encouraged to ask a lot of questions and not always get a lot of answers. But I think that there is this connection to others who have gone before us. We look to our ancestors, we look to Torah stories, we look and we feel somewhat comforted that we are not alone. I think that that's a very important aspect of communal prayer, even on this forum. I know in our temple, your former home, Erez, we are there on Friday night services, sitting at our dining table. One of the things that's really lovely is that after the service, there's kind of a going around of just somebody says, each person says something that they've been grateful for this week. And for me, what's useful is just, again, the connection with the person, not somebody, quote, sitting next to me in the temple, but to talk a little bit about their personal experience during this time. And I think that's been very helpful. It's not about prayer, but it's about connecting within a prayer community. I think that I've noticed that many people are tuning into a lot of different lessons and teachings from Buddhism, from Hinduism, from Judaism, from Christianity, and it kind of doesn't matter what your base what your base religion is, because there's so many teachings that are speaking to so many of us. But faith has a way of helping through challenging times. Those who are more faithful find it easier. And this is also a very, very large component of resilience. And people who have faith seem to grieve more easily. Not easy, but more easily, because there is a feeling of connection that their loved one is going to be well looked after in the afterlife. I think that it's so personal, but yet it seems to, again, be on the upswing. I think one of the big problems with people opening up and going back into their, quote, normal life is, how are we going to keep people separated and healthy when they want to reconvene in large prayer spaces? And again, the kind, the generous, the caring act is to not do that, so that we cannot infect others. But yet we need the camaraderie and we need the community to pray with. So
that's interesting that you said the kind act is to do the opposite of our natural good inclination, which is just so difficult for everybody.
Well, sometimes you have to do the kind thing is to do something that is not necessarily in your best interest. Sometimes to do something kind is to recognize not what you need, but what the other person needs. And that really is what kindness is about, because kindness is all about being in service to yourself, but also how you can be in service to others. That's what loving kindness is.
Yeah, and that's, I think, why our rabbis tell it best in Pirkei Avot, right? Al Shosha Devarim Ha'olam Omed, that the world stands on three things: the Torah, Avodah, worship, prayer, and the last but not least, as Ebby started this night hundreds of times, Al Gemilut Chasadim, not just acts of kindness, but acts of loving kindness. I like to say, actually, I learned this from my dad, who I think is still here, right? Not doing things that you need to do, but really things that you want and desire to do. I think that's a beautiful definition of the kindness advantage. I just want to make sure everybody sees this one last time. The Kindness Advantage by Dr. Dale Atkins and Amanda Salzauer. It's not a novel type of read. It actually is a, would you say it's under self-help?
It's probably under self-help. It's really interactive, and
Yeah.
we really ask participants, the readers, to participate with each other, with their children, and we use a lot of examples of very inspiring kids.
Yeah.
Kids relate to, and we have a little bit of research in there and some activities we ask you to do. So
It's an amazing activity
Thanks.
book, if you wish, over this time period. And also, I think what I learned a lot right now, you title it Cultivating Compassion and Connected Children. But as you know, Manish Chana, it's for the youngest child, but each one of us continues to be that child at all points of our lives. And we have the ability to continue to work on the fundamentals and the foundations of kindness. And God willing, one day to also pass those to others before us and to the sides of us as well. So again, I want to thank Dr. Atkins. I want to thank Farshad Rafi and our executive board of our Standing Temple Men's Club, Abi Tabarai, Michael Silberstein, I see as well. We're so excited that you're with us as well. Usually, Dale, we have a wonderful meal after, so we'll gonna do a rain check on that. But we are just honored for everybody to be here. And a thank you to Rebecca Small, who's our administrator, and Rachel Ann Levy, who's helped us as well. Farshad, they see you have a last comment as well.
Wanted to say thank you, Dr. Atkins. Really enjoyed it. Looking forward to taking a look at your book, and I hope that your principles and concepts will get into school curricula. I think there's something of value to be extracted there in a school environment.
Thank you. Some schools are